everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's Francis and it's Nate. Nate, we're coming in end of July. I have a surprise pumpkin patch that's suddenly growing in my front yard. I'm very excited about. Turns out the best thing to seed my front yard is just putting birdseed out constantly, and then like all the sunflowers and all the seeds that are in the birdseed mix, they're not actually like roasted or anything, so they're still viable seeds. So I have a 7-foot long pumpkin plant now growing. I think it's a pumpkin plant. We'll see. They look like pumpkins that are starting to grow, so that's exciting.
I can't remember why I had the birdseed in the first place, but when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, living in New Mexico, I somehow managed, and you have a kid close to that age, you understand how these things happen. I somehow managed to both have birdseed like with me, carry birdseed with me into the bathroom for some reason, and spill some. And so my, being 9, my brain was like, well, out of sight, out of mind. And I just washed all the seeds down the drain. And you can imagine what's going to happen next. That, like a fucking rainforest of pumpkin seeds and other things started growing out of the drain, and basically had to like pull the plants out as they individually germinated. So definitely do not do that if you spill birdseed. But yeah, birdseed, pretty viable. Lots of seeds, they grow,
It's always so like we take for granted the like knowledge that we have. Like it's so easy to just be like, yeah, dinosaurs exist because so many smart people were there before us. And then like when you have a child, you realize just like how stupid humanity really is, and that if it wasn't for like collective knowledge, we'd all be dead. Which, if you look back in the Neolithic and Paleolithic eras, it's kind of how it went. And you just like, we just have to figure it out. And at some point in time, but hey, that's a learning experience. At some point in time, every kid has to learn about the germination process and how things like that work. And hopefully you had parents who are understanding and are just like, well, young Nate, let's explain to you what happened, why this happened, and why you should never do it again.
The answer to your question is no, but I did learn one way or the other. Yeah, man. I mean, I'm actually at the point where I'm harvesting some of my onions. As I understand it, when the onion greens just suddenly look like they've given up the will to live, but are still healthy, just lying on the ground, that means that like the root's not going to, or the bulb's not going to grow anymore. So you can pull them out and harvest them. So I've got some kind of like small to medium sized onions that have grown that I've got now, and I've got some big gigantic ones that are still growing. The greens are still upright, so I'm excited to see how that turns out. And then I've also got like 4 or 5 heads of garlic. Then those are doing phenomenally. So weirdly, the weather has actually cooperated. It's been really hot. I've got the blinds drawn. I had to turn the fan off to record this. So yeah, it's been hot here. I mean, a lot of people like to make fun of England, but like, I'm just saying, when it starts getting into, the 90s with no air conditioning, like that is not fun anywhere on the planet. And that's what we're going through right now. So it's going to cool off tomorrow, and then by Friday it'll be like way more manageable. But yeah, since Saturday, I think Friday or Saturday, it's just been fucking hot. And that's an experience anywhere you live. Here in this country, I've found that it tends to be that in the shade, it doesn't feel as humid. Like the humidity is relatively low when it gets this hot. Like basically when it starts getting into the 90s Fahrenheit, like, say into the 30s, like the mid 30s Celsius, you typically find that in order for the conditions to be that hot here, it's got to be a clear day and the humidity is below 50%. So like, yeah, it sucks, but if you're in the shade, it's really not that bad. It does get humid at night, but it also cools off at night. Like normally it gets into the 60s at night. Here it's still been kind of warm at night. Like it's been in the high 60s, low 70s, which in America would be more tolerable, but that's pretty hot at night for here. But I would say that, in the shade, it's not that bad, but British houses suck. We've talked about that a ton of times. Hot in summer, cold in winter, especially new builds, very little trees, very little shade. So, I mean, I can understand why people are losing their minds because it's this country isn't really built for this kind of temperature in the sense that they've never really had to deal with it before. And so, for me, I've dealt with hotter, but also, let's be honest, when I was a kid and we didn't have air conditioning, it didn't really get this hot that often where I was living, like in Rhode Island or in California. And then in New Mexico, it definitely got this hot in the summer, but it's super dry. So it's just a different kind of feeling. And then in Indiana, we had air conditioning. And obviously not everybody has air conditioning in America. That's a thing I have to keep reiterating people, that even in the hottest parts of America, people do not have air conditioning. But here, almost nobody has residential air conditioning. So if this is becoming more and more the norm, that fucking sucks, because the people are gonna. I feel like you're just gonna start. It's gonna be like other European countries where you're just gonna start seeing those ductless mini split air conditioners everywhere, because it absolutely is getting to the point where it's kind of insufferably hot. So
hey man,
that's how I'm doing.
Those mini splits are pretty great, though. You should.
Oh, they're amazing, and it's wild how efficient they are. I remember seeing a video that when you use them for heating, they don't really function well in like North American temperatures for heating, because they wind up using way too much power. But in places like this, where the coldest I've ever seen it get in Greater London, where, since I've lived here, has been a couple of degrees below freezing. Like, it doesn't really get that cold normally. I mean, it can, and it has in history, but it doesn't really get that cold on average. And apparently those ductless mini split, heater air conditioner units, when you're operating them in the range of like in and around, I want to say like 20 to 25 Fahrenheit to 40 Fahrenheit. And I can't do the calculation in centigrade right in my head, but it's sort of like single digits, either negative or positive, I think. Those units are so much more efficient than electric space heaters or an electric heater, or even like a gas boiler. Basically, they're as I understand it, those units are like as efficient as having your own gas heater in your home, and doing all the combustion there, but they're doing it from electricity, like from, just mains electricity. So yeah, I'm a huge fan, and honestly, if we stay in this house, we're eventually going to have to get one, because it's getting to the point where certain times of year it's just fucking insufferable. And those things are like, yeah, they use a lot of energy. It's probably not good for the environment if everyone has to get them, but it's also going to come to a point where if it keeps getting hotter and hotter, like, it's certainly better than obligating everyone to die. And it's also certainly better than the overall energy usage that comes from central AC, which is massively inefficient.
Well, it's fine. In 100 years, we can all go visit the Sheffield desert and, enjoy, take in the central air. And sorry to everybody who's going through climate hell. I certainly have been through climate hell myself, but it's nice that this year's kind of nice. So picking cucumbers and tomatoes, doing all right over here. Just chasing rabbits out of my garden. Sorry, Oregon's on fire though. I'll recycle more next time, I bet.
Yeah, I heard folks in New York are getting smoky, bad air from the wildfires, which is insane. That never happened all the time I lived there, but I remember that happening as a kid in New Mexico and what it's like when you're in wildfire smoke. And in my case, back then, we were very close. Like, the fire was in a state park, maybe like 50, 60 miles from Santa Fe. So I remember what that's like. It feels fucking apocalyptic. So I can only imagine what it's like, in these cities that are being hit by it, or in the states that are actually on fire. Like, it's genuinely wild. And yeah, I mean, it feels, here we're having really hot weather, the hottest it's ever been in some parts of the United Kingdom. I think parts of Northern Ireland have recorded their hottest ever July temperatures. Just a couple hundred miles, if even that, south of here in Belgium and Germany, there was massive flooding. Like, they got a month's worth of rain in a couple of hours. I mean, it carved entire like canyons, from runoff. It's wild. And yeah, it sucks. It really sucks, man. I mean, it feels like, people have been, what's the right word here? Just saying, well, this is a future problem. This is a future problem, whatever. There's natural cycles of heat and cooling and stuff like that. And it's like, no, this is clearly abnormal. Like, when you keep having 1 in 1,000 year floods every 10 years, like, something's going on. And yeah, sucks. Folks don't really want to reckon with it. I feel as though I don't know, I don't want to be a doomer about it, but I feel like we've seen examples in our lives of individual small incidents or relatively small incidents happening and creating huge opportunities and momentum towards, deranged fascist right-wing politics. And I feel like when you take into consideration the scope of human migration that is most likely going to happen as a result of parts of the earth becoming uninhabitable, or reasonably uninhabitable, for people without means, I just despair at what I think could happen. And now obviously I hold out hope that, they're going to invent fucking ultra fusion or some shit. And it's going to be like, no, we have so much limitless, energy generation in electricity now that we're just going to build one big air conditioner for the entire planet and fix this. I mean, who knows? Maybe someone will come up, trying to invent the next dick pill, will accidentally invent, some unbelievable compound that allows them to absorb carbon or CO2 from the air and, just run that at scale and solve the problem. Who knows? But as it's currently trending, I think it's going to keep getting worse before it gets better. And I feel that way about a lot of things politically. And yeah, man, it just really sucks. But I'm glad you're having a nice summer. I mean, when it's nice here, when it's a couple of degrees centigrade cooler than it is now, it's so glorious, man. It's so unbelievably nice. But you hit 30 and above in this country, and it's just, you start trending towards the no fun zone. And the closer to 35 you get, the worse it is. And above 35 is just bananas. So we have not yet had a day that hot, and it feels hotter somehow. So maybe that's just carbon concentration in the air is slowly increasing each year and just making all of us dumber.
Maybe is England reintroducing lead back into the petrol?
Oh, fuck, dude. You know what's fun? It's sad and funny is that like they phased out leaded petrol in 1999, which is I think later than America did. And while the lead levels are at safer, within health guidelines, safe tolerance today, they are still way higher than other countries in Europe. And I think when you factor in a lot of people spent most of their lives breathing that shit in, like you probably have on average a higher concentration of lead in the blood of people of that age, even if it's not like enough to produce, massively.
Maybe this is why it's Turf Island. Maybe lead poisoning makes you a turf.
Look, man, there are lots of explanations out there. Who knows? But I do think that there's some, it's not the factor. It's not the only factor, but I do think it is a factor in every country on earth that like generationally we went from having people by and large exposed to lead a lot to not being exposed to it. And I mean, that genuinely affects the brain at higher concentrations. So who even knows?
If Graham Linehan sucks starting the exhaust of a Toyota or something like that until his wife leaves him and he has to scream about like how women have vaginas or something. Oh my God, it's starting to make sense. It's starting to make sense. England is just, it's just covered in lead and colonialism, and now everybody's dumb.
It's funny that you say colonialism too, because Graham Linehan's Irish, but
which is just so funny.
He moved to England and he just observed turfdom so hard into his bones. He posted so hard that he posted himself into, losing his career and his wife and kids. And he keeps going. He keeps going.
It's
man wrote a blog post about me. I don't know if I told you, but he literally wrote a blog post about me and used the picture as the header image. And slapped some stuff on it to make it seem, basically to imply in a joking manner that I am a child sex abuser. So yeah, I'm feeling like this is a really normal country.
This is any normal person would sit back and say, wait a minute, am I wrong that my wife and my family and my job, everything is leaving me? And really, like, a normal person would hopefully sit back and think, wow, maybe I should rethink my life. But, when you've just been inhaling leaded fumes for the entirety of your life because England just doesn't give a shit about your brain, it starts to make it's just there. Like, there's a hole where, like, logic would normally get caught in your brain, and the hole just is there. It's this big, like, lead pipe of a hole that just whoop, out the other side. That's where you get your J.K. Rowlings too, man. It's all the olds that have been like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of turfs here in America that are very shitty and loud and obnoxious, but it really feels like the British ones are shittier and louder and more obnoxious somehow. And so I'm just going to go ahead and blame lead petrol.
I would also say that in America, well, I don't want to defend the English too much or defend the British in general too much, but I would also say that in America, the argument against trans liberation is primarily concentrated in the religious right. And I think that the same kind of, call it middle to upper middle class prejudices that exist against trans people in Britain that are so commonly expressed in every single newspaper in this country, I think if I were to hazard a guess, that you'd probably find a lot more people in America who would be of a kind of position that I fundamentally disagree with, which is that they basically say I accept, trans people living their lives, but not around me, and that's sort of, that's the liberal compromise among British people, because you that people can posit themselves as enlightened centrists if they say that in the face of deranged mobs saying that literally every trans person is a rapist and all this insane shit that they're constantly saying. And I think that really weak compromise position that absolutely defeats the purpose of this, which is to say, like, to let people, like, no one is saying that cis people and trans people are identical. Like, that's not the fucking point. But that, that you shouldn't get bent out of shape trying to suss out who's cis and who's trans. You should just, make it easy for trans people to live their lives the same way as cis people. That's not a hard thing to say, but like that, you get what ifed to death by deranged freaks in Britain. It's like, basically, the British are awake because all of a sudden your mentions look like leftist memes with walls of text, but also with mugshots. And it's just deranged, man. But I would say that my take is that America, it's so the province of the far right. Like, my parents used to complain a lot about the extent to which this stuff has been in like local politics, that, Republicans in Lawrence County trying to get elected on anti-trans bathroom bills and stuff like that. I mean, that happened, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And I do think you're seeing more of it. But the thing that I think is that if this were not, if homophobia and transphobia and, sort of enforcement of like very heteronormative and very traditional, I'm using that word pejoratively, sexual values was not the sole province of the far right in America, I think you would see more of this shit in America. And I think the conditions are going to emerge with, QAnon people going after trans people as sort of like the missing link in their insane conspiracy. And if I had to hazard a guess, I think a lot of the kind of turf stuff you see from British people, you will also see it in America. And you will also see, just as you've seen the kind of like soft laundering of turf talking points from columnists in newspapers here, you're going to see that stuff, but it's going to be in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or, in Newsweek or in these places. It's going to be on CNN. It's going to be like center right to right wing stuff. And I think what makes it different here is that people who, in America, it's rarer for people to identify themselves as feminists. Like Americans have so successfully demonized the concept of being a feminist that you're sort of inviting criticism and abuse by calling yourself one. Like, basically right-wing people see you as an enemy. And so that's bad, but that has also created the phenomenon in America where you don't have as much of the sort of center right, like bordering reactionary feminists, which you absolutely do here. And then there's all the culture of, having the right to exclude people from the space. A lot of this is class politics. Like, it's a different country. But the thing I would say is that it is very easy for us to look at turf posting and all this shit and how insane Britain is, and how, like, when it's between 7 a.m. and midnight UK time, the internet as a whole is just more transphobic. Like, yeah, that is a phenomenon, but I don't think anywhere is safe. And I think my big concern in America is that you're going to see people weaponizing the same British angle of being like, oh, trans people are all perverts and they're after your children and stuff like that. And like child sex panics in America have worked as political things. I mean, look, and moral panics in general. I mean, we're seeing one now with the whole bullshit about this, you know, this boogeyman concept of critical race theory. So yeah, man, Turf Island, but I don't think anywhere on Earth is immune, and I certainly don't think anywhere in the Anglosphere is immune. So sorry for the long rant there. I have to say this because this is, you know, I have a lot of trans friends here in the UK. Obviously, like one of my co-hosts on Trash Future is trans, and all of the co-hosts of Kill James Bond, the show that I produce, are trans. And so like I've seen a lot of these perspectives, and I guess the thing that I would say is that a lot of them saw it coming 10 years ago when it was just sort of like some fringe Gamergate style freaks, but a much smaller movement. And now it's basically every newspaper in the country, every TV station in the country, and every political party in the country. Like even the notionally left political parties are basically adopting transphobic positions. And in the case of the Green Party, their party leader resigned because she was like, I'm not going to endorse transphobia. And, you know, I mean, yeah, it's wild. The only party in the country that has taken a stand against transphobia since Corbyn was removed, and Corbyn was a trans ally, but he was never like it was never a big talking point with him. Nicola Sturgeon for the Scottish Nationalist Party did stand up and say she was pro-trans rights, and she hasn't really suffered any political consequences. But that don't let that excuse the SNP, because they have so many transphobes in their local councils, among their MPs. Like, it's very bad. So basically, in this country, transphobia is supported, endorsed by every major newspaper, every major TV station, every major political party. And it sucks. And also the NHS, the wait lists are so long, and the process to get your gender formally changed is so onerous that it takes years, more like a decade, to do. You can't even get prescribed HRT until you've been basically living, as I understand it, and I might be wrong here, you can't get HRT until you've been living you've been out as a trans person for at least 2 years. The therapy evaluation is super invasive. And there are no NHS surgeons who perform bottom surgery for trans men, for example. So you just cannot medically transition and get bottom surgery for a trans man here on the NHS. The wait list on the NHS for gender reassignment surgery for trans women is 5 to 7 years at best. Effectively, the NHS does not really provide trans healthcare in practice. And yet, the TERFs will have you believe that literally they're that George Soros is flying around on fucking Lakutu's cloud from Super Mario Brothers, zapping people with a trans ray. It's fucking wild.
Got a big set of garden shears and cutting dicks off and sewing them onto other people.
Just snipping them off left and right like fucking their Struwwelpeter.
You give me your dick. I'm going to sew it to another person.
Yeah, exactly. Frankenpenis. Man, I've talked a lot, and we've got some stuff to talk about. So let's hit the meat of the story first. So they're evacuating all American troops and NATO troops out of Afghanistan, and that includes the evacuation of Bagram Airfield, at one point the biggest military installation in the country. Francis, have you been to Bagram?
I have. I was in Bagram in 2004. I was in Bagram when the Pat Tillman Memorial USO was being built. So, and this is kind of a full circle story by J.P. Lawrence, who I served. He was in the unit that I worked with in Iraq. So J.P. and I are we've known each other for quite a few years. That was 2009, and so I've been following his writing career. And he's been based out of Afghanistan for Stars and Stripes for years. So highly recommend going back and finding some of his stuff. But the memorials that were always around Iraq and Afghanistan were very confusing to me, because they were permanent, or at least they were semi-permanent. By the time we were building memorials, it was like we had this idea in our mind of, I'm going to leave this here and the next people will take care of it, because we're always going to be here. We're always going to be rotating stuff out. And so, all around Bagram, all around every base, every base that had somebody die or be wounded or anything, there was probably going to be some sort of memorialization, either a painting on the big T walls, or there was going to be like an actual thing that was built, or something. There's always some kind of memorial that was in the country. And you had those things in Vietnam, certainly, and you had those in various other wars in which we had stationary military bases. But like Afghanistan, just after a while, it just seemed like, no, we're just going to be here forever. All this stuff is going to stay here. And like specifically building a USO in a hostile country that we're at war with was just such a massive difference from the way we have ever waged war. Because you got to understand, this USO was built in 2004. We're only 3 years into the war, and they're already saying, yeah, let's build a hard standing building, a USO that has all these mini splits, everything built into it, as if it is going to be a permanent structure. And then that's what we have for the troops coming in and going out from the ADAG outside of Afghanistan. Yeah, I don't remember what ADAG stands for, but it's where the planes come in and out. Basically,
So
Army
effectively.
Airport.
Effectively at Bagram, you had, when you came off the flight line, you have the passenger terminal, which was kind of like a corrugated metal building, like a big barn, if you will. And it had lots of bench seating in there and screens talking about like when flights were leaving and arriving and stuff like that. It was a small passenger terminal, but obviously bigger than any passenger terminal on any military airfield in the country aside from Kandahar Airfield. And then when there was like a main entrance, more like an entrance exit, if I remember correctly. It had a sliding door, and when you stepped outside, there was like a little access road, and directly across the street from it was another corrugated metal hardstand building that was the USO, and that had snacks and TVs and phones and couches and stuff. People would, play video games there. Like it was like a rec center, but it was, much like the USO in the airport, in a civilian airport in America, it was sort of like intended to be a place for people to hang out while they were waiting on flights in and out of the country. But they also, if I remember correctly, did have events there for people who were permanent party at Bagram. The fact that they named it after Tillman always struck me as like this really darkly ironic thing, because they killed Pat Tillman. Pat Tillman was killed in a friendly fire incident, and they lied to his family, and they burned his body armor and equipment at Bagram. In fact, someone in the chain of command who made the decision to burn his kit was in fact General Stanley McChrystal.
Ooh.
Now, McChrystal would have been 30 years into his career at this point, so he definitely would have been very senior. I think he was probably a 2-star at that point. But yeah, McChrystal authorized the decision. And one of the things that I found really disgusting about the way Pat Tillman's family was treated was that, I don't believe that they intentionally iced Tillman because of his views on the war. I think that even in Ranger Regiment, which is a pretty gung-ho unit, all things considered, and that's putting it very mildly, I met people when I was in my unit who, were anti-war, in the sense that like, they were like, yeah, this war's bullshit. Once I saw it from my own eyes, I realized it was bullshit. Like, I would say the majority of people who were there, especially in the enlisted ranks, were just like, yeah, this is bullshit. What the fuck are we doing? But what I will say about Tillman is that, Tillman had come to a political consciousness and really wanted to share that consciousness, and then was killed in combat. And as I understand it, just like, they were in a strung out position, and he wound up getting the guy who was putting down suppressive fire with a saw thought he was an insurgent, and he was trying to wave at him like, stop shooting. And the guy shot him and killed him. And the thing about it is, they lied to his family, and they lied to the press. They lied to America, obviously, that, the NFL guy who enlisted had been killed. And the thing is, one of the statements that John Krakauer reports in his book, Where Men Win Glory, which is about Pat Tillman's life, is that one of the people involved, and I don't know at what level we're talking here, if this was in, USASOC or this was like the Department of the Army, but they basically responded to questions about, from reporters about the Tillman family asking for answers, basically like, well, oh, yeah, well, that's the problem, right? They're atheists, so they don't believe there's an afterlife, so they get really hung up on these conspiracies because they don't have the belief that you and I do, that there's something better waiting on the other side. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, yeah, man, the way they treated Tillman was such shit. So the fact that they named the USO after him always really struck me as just so deeply cynical. It's you know what it is it's such a PAO move. It's like it's an insane, like, we got caught red-handed doing some shit, so we're going to go the exact opposite. Like, we're going to go full, this guy was a hero. And to be fair, that's always what nobody wanted that narrative. Nobody wants the narrative of football guy, leaves football lifestyle and joins Army Rangers, and rather than becoming a national hero or killing a bunch of Al-Qaeda or whatever, he gets gunned down by his own people because communications were shit. And and conspiracy wise or whatever, I'm with you. I don't believe that anybody was just like, oh, Pat Tillman, he also said shitty things about the war. We all said shitty things about the war. Nobody fucking liked the war back then. Like, we didn't have the weird dogmatic nonsense of loving the troops and never questioning the war, because back then it was still fresh. We were still getting reports daily of people dying, either their side or our side or anything like that. And so what it turns into is, oh shit, we fucked up. We have to cover this up. And not only are we going to cover it up, but we're also going to hail this man as a hero, so that eventually when they were caught with the cover up, it didn't matter because they're already, but look, we hailed him as a hero. He's a hero and we're going to do hero stuff. I cannot disagree more strongly with what you said, though, in the sense that I think that in 2004, it was like peak, you're a traitor if you don't support the wars. You think about the way that the re-election campaign for Bush was happening. Yeah. I mean, I would say where I would agree with you is that you didn't have the sort of just psychotic, I'm going to go down with the shit because of God and country kind of like, I know the war is complete bullshit and is going to go on forever, but I'm doing it anyway for I've made peace with that. Among the troops, among soldiers, there was still this notion of like, well, especially the war in Afghanistan, like the guys who were ultimately responsible for 9/11 in terms of planning and financing it, had training camps in Afghanistan. And now, all right, look, I understand. Well, I think only one of the hijackers had ever been to Afghanistan, if not none of them. I can't remember. It was a very small number. 9/11 was planned in Hamburg, Germany. There were no Afghans involved. There were mostly Saudis. So that's already tenuous as is. But like the narrative in America was definitely like, okay, well, the camps are in Afghanistan, so Afghanistan's got to pay. And I think among troops, there was still a sort of like, this just happened. It was 3 years prior. But also, everyone that I met who'd been in Iraq and Afghanistan at that time was just like, yeah, I don't know what the fuck we're doing there. So for Tillman to be searching for answers and to be talking to Noam Chomsky and reading, Howard Zinn and stuff like that is not that out of place with lots and lots of other enlisted soldiers and officers who were there. I mean, myself included, and I imagine you too. It's just that, he had played for the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah. If Pat Tillman was still alive, he'd still be bugging Noam Chomsky through the email. Just like every other irritating leftist online who posts like the replies from Noam Chomsky, which is basically, which between every line is Noam Chomsky being like, please fucking leave me alone.
Yeah. Pat Tillman would actually be the third co-host of this show, and instead of doing episodes about is this fascist where we assign a rating to movies, he would just turn around and email Noam Chomsky, be like, well, we watched the first episode of The Pacific. Do you think it's fascist or not? But no, I mean, like I said, I disagree with your take about the climate at the time politically, but I think among troops, the climate was definitely, I mean, the experience that I had before I even deployed or talking to people was just sort of like, man, what the fuck are we even doing there? Like, it's a huge waste. It's a joke.
In 2004, at least we had it's still early enough and we can still feel like we're doing stuff because we are building wells, we are building schools. It's just we didn't really have an end goal or an understanding of how corruption works, whether it be the Afghan government or our own.
But also they hadn't yet had the first actual presidential election in Afghanistan, which was in 2005, where Karzai won through massive voter fraud. But I agree with your point, though, that it's like a super PAO move, and I think the naked cynicism of it really, really struck me, in the sense that, like, it's effectively like creating an NCO award, like the Vanessa Guillen Award for Sharp NCO Excellence or something like that. Like taking a story of something that represents an absolute failure on all parts, like, you know, a tactical failure, a messaging failure, a leadership failure, a fundamental respect for human dignity failure, and turning it into this thing that people are supposed to feel proud of. You know, it's really grim. And I think, you know, to talk about the article, the thing that really gets me is there's so much effort being made to preserve the artifacts and mementos, to evacuate them from the Pat Tillman USO. But to me, I don't know, man, like, you know, man, I helped a friend build, it was one of our NCOs in the training room. He built a climbing wall. He ordered all the parts out of his own budget, like his own money, all the hand grips and stuff. And then he got permission to do this. And then from the, you know, the class 4 yard, the like construction supply yard, he got, you know, 4x4s and plywood boards and, you know, cement and stuff. And he literally built a climbing wall, and he did a really fucking amazing job. I mean, for a guy who literally was just doing this after he got done with work, like a lot of times just digging support posts, you know, after dark, after work hours with, you know, a headlamp on. And after one of our lieutenants got killed in an IED, we were thinking, like, you know, this dude was super into the outdoors. He was super into climbing. Could we maybe dedicate this to him? And they you know, the guys, like one of the KBR workers carved a sign for this dude, and they painted it and put it on the wall, and like they as like a dedication to it. And so, as I understand it, when the base got evacuated and handed over, they literally brought all the hand grips back and the sign back and stuff, and they reinstalled it and called it like the, you know, Lieutenant Bradshaw Memorial Wall at one of the gyms on Fort Richardson, Alaska. But the thing about it is, like, to me, I understand, I'm of two minds here, which is that I understand the need to preserve things. I understand the idea of like the history involved, and also the sort of things that were, you know, memorials on site that are going to be, you know, they're going to be forgotten and going to be damaged. But I also am like, I am very weirded out by the idea of prioritizing that when there's so much humanitarian catastrophe happening all around this. And like, okay, maybe you can walk and chew gum at the same time, but I don't know, man. Like,
you know, I feel like this isn't necessarily a prioritization of the government at large, that this is probably people just grabbing stuff, or
just one or two people.
Or, you know, because it doesn't take much. It's Pat Tillman's jersey. Somebody grabbed it and donated it somewhere else back in the States. You know, they're just kind of rotating a lot of this stuff home, which is good. I mean, like, look, every war has its artifacts. Like, I know places where I can go see pieces of the Berlin Wall, like in Missouri of all fucking places. They have them down at Fort Leonard Wood. And various other places. Like, sometimes you'll go to a museum of weird shit, and then they're just like, hey, here's a piece of the Berlin Wall, or here's a piece of here's some chunk of war, or 9/11 steel girder or something. All that shit just always exists. And like I said, for me, the biggest thing here is that how permanent some of these things were. Like painting, you have a rock climbing wall, like the massive murals that were all over the place. All this stuff just gets like painted over and discarded and disused, and then this stuff just, I don't know, like Nate, I'm still having weird times processing Afghanistan. Like, I always thought that it would be simple, because, you know, I'm 17 years removed from my deployment. I'm 10 years removed from my last deployment. But just watching like the slow dismantling of Afghanistan as Afghanistan itself dismantles itself, And it's so everything that comes out about this, about like all these things, all the destruction of property that we're doing, so that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, the bringing home of all of our war memorabilia, all of these memorials that we've created that have to be dug up and thrown on into a connex somewhere and brought home, or just destroyed. Like, things just need to be destroyed because we can't let it fall to the hands of the Taliban or some weird shit like that. Like, I don't know, man. It's just, Afghanistan was a real fucking weird time, and like to have a capstone be, let's talk about Pat Tillman's jersey, a man who was gunned down by his own people, who the government lied about it, and who was against the Iraq War from the very beginning, loudly and very very openly against it, is just such a fucking capstone. It's just such a, like, we started with shit and we're gonna end it with shit. Nothing of value was produced here. Nothing you did is lasting or forever, and everything is just going to fall into a gigantic pit because of mismanagement and corruption. And the Pat, just seeing this and reading the article of like all the things, and then yesterday the no context Afghan war, the Twitter account posted a picture of the Burger King trailer arriving in Bagram, which I was there for, and it's just like, it's striking me just how fucking ludicrous the last 20 years of my life have been, like, of everybody's life. But these things intimately affect you and me, and will always intimately affect you and me. And I try not to talk about it because, like, it's not about me. Like, people, and I don't mean this as a survivor's guilt thing, people have had it way worse. And by people, I mean the Afghans. I mean the people who get radicalized by our dumb bullshit, or the people who get killed by our dumb bullshit, or the people who lose people to our dumb bullshit. Like, it's difficult to have these conversations in a way that centers around myself, because I just don't feel like that's the real story that should be told. But at the same time, like, it is 20 years of our lives. Like, Afghanistan intimately affected you too. We both, lose people and lose parts of ourselves, whether mentally or physically, in these spaces. And I don't know, it's being dismantled before our eyes, and that's good, but also, like, it's very indicative of a failed mission. Everything that we read is just like, here's how we failed. And not only failed in not like, oh, we didn't meet our mission goals, but like collapsed a country that, to be fair, was kind of collapsed already, but we certainly did not help it.
Yeah, I mean, the take that I would say is that I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think that the contempt that I see people treating Afghans with is just so profound and uniform. Everywhere you go, it's sort of like, well, they're just beasts and monsters. I guess we got to let them roll around in the muck like swine, and it's disgusting to me. I think I was most profoundly affected by how kind and hospitable and open-minded Afghan people were towards us, far more than we were towards them. And the unbelievable privation that they have to experience on a daily basis, and the impossible choices facing Afghan people. Do you work a job that pays, but that you will be risking you and your family's life to take? Do you volunteer for the security services where you will most likely be killed and you will be treated like shit and have your money filched? Or do you work for the insurgency, who at least pay you your whole paycheck, but also, commit horrendous abuses? It's not a simple situation. And I think that in a country, that has faced 45 years, almost 50 years of instability, when the king was deposed in 1974, this kind of touched off an internal insurgency, against the communist government. But then subsequently, the worst of it was the warlords fighting each other after the Soviets left. You have people who have faced an impossible situation since 1974, really. And the contempt and the armchair quarterbacking that I see, it makes me so angry that I've just sort of disengaged from it. you were there in '04, and you probably, from having to report on stuff and put out press shit, were able to twig pretty quickly the fact that there was no real reason for us to be there. And I saw that in 2009 and 2010, and it was just so bitter and agonizing to know that what you were doing was it didn't make sense, and everyone involved had to maintain kayfabe that like it was making a difference when it wasn't. And I don't know, man, like I saw the way Afghan civilians got treated by both American troops or NATO troops, the whole spectrum, and by the Afghan security forces. And I think that the indignity that they experienced would make any American want to get revenge.
No American would have put up with how we treated the Afghans.
And the only reason that they didn't kill more of us is because we had like 100-to-1, weaponry advantage, and also that like they are better people than we are when it comes to facing these impossible choices. They are forced to suck things up that we wouldn't. We aren't forced to. Our material circumstances aren't as bad on average. And I come away from this with an incredible amount of empathy and respect for Afghan people, but also an understanding of just how impossible the situation is, how grim it is for everyone. And I know that there were people on our side, on the US, the coalition side, who did genuinely want to help. But those people, to my knowledge, everyone who went there with those intentions came away from it with the impression that what we're doing isn't helping and we need to stop it. And so watching this happen, I'm not really surprised. I am dismayed. It was a long time ago. I mean, I left Afghanistan 11 years ago, but I genuinely, if I have any, call it, sadness or despair, it's for Afghan people, knowing how hard this is, knowing how it's not going to get better anytime soon. And when I see people, smarmily passing judgment on them, like I want to do war crimes against people in the West.
Yeah.
So
man.
Every
American who says, why can't the Afghans just stand up and defeat the Taliban on their own? It's just, it is everything that I can do to not reach to the computer and swirly them immediately.
Yeah, man, it's so depressing. And the thing about it is, I hope that stability comes to that country and that the people in that country are able to live a life free from violence and the threat of violence. And I wish that something could have helped. It didn't. Nothing we were doing was going to ever help. I feel terrible about that, but it's not really about what I feel. It's about the present situation. And I think what you can do in the present moment is, if there are organizations that are providing relief, support those organizations, and, helping people whose lives are going to be threatened by the inevitable Taliban takeover of that country to get out. And it sucks because then here's yet another generation of Afghans forced to go abroad. This happened, in the instability in the 70s. This happened after the Soviet invasion. This happened during the warlord era. It's been happening since there was a brief lull when expats or when refugees came home immediately after the fall of the Taliban. And then many of those people, if they can afford to, have left again because it's so dangerous to live there. And support those people. Anyone who tries to, great replacement theory stuff about Afghan refugees. I can't say what I think of them, but you know what I'm getting at. These are people who put their lives on the line more than the average American did. And when you think about the percentage of Americans who did anything involving in the war, it's a small number. Don't weep for us. Don't feel sad for us. There's not that many of us. There's not that many of us at all. But there's lots and lots of Afghans who have suffered. Think of them. Think of how to help them. That's all I can say. Because man, like don't fucking feel sad for the troops. Like, yeah, it's weird about the Pat Tillman shit. It's weird about all of it. Like the symbolism behind it is weird. But what really matters is like there are people suffering because of this. And they've been suffering since we got there. They've been suffering since the country became destabilized. A lot of what destabilized the country was US soft power and, you know, dumping money into things to stir up violence in the provinces. And that has not gone away. That's only gotten worse. When the U.S. became the occupier, Pakistan started doing the same thing it did to destabilize the communist government against us while we gave money to Pakistan. Americans don't know this, or they pretend they don't know this, whereas any average Afghan, even if they can't even fucking write their own name, will be like, you guys pay both sides of the war. Don't you think that's weird? Like, and you know what? They're right.
Yep.
So...
And it's just... And personally, now that Afghanistan is starting to slowly trickle away as a combat area, they're just like there's so many Afghan war vets that want to write stuff now, and it's like I don't want to read any more shit from our side, you know. Like, I lived it and I've read it, and some of it's good and some of it's bad, but goddamn, like it was never about us. And like, I really feel like any war on Afghanistan or any book on Afghanistan and the American involvement there is just one page that should just be, I was lied to and so were they, and it's all fucked up. And really what I want to hear stuff. I want to hear the stories from the Afghans' perspective. I want to hear the people who had to live it and breathe it, and somebody who like me, like I want to find a 38-year-old Afghan and just be like, we grew up at the exact same time on different sides of this. Tell me your story. Tell me everything that's happened in the last 20 years for you, because you've been here and I haven't. And I think that those are really, like, if there's any story out of Afghanistan that's important, when it comes to American involvement, it's going to be that, because, you know, there were two civil wars between the Soviets leaving and us showing up, and then there's the Soviet War, and there's just so much war in that country. It's just constant fighting, constant poverty, and constantly trying to scrape by, and somebody else is always trying to fuck it up. And this time it just happened to be us. It happened to be our turn to come in and fuck it all up. And I am tired of hearing about it from the perspective of soldiers. I've listened to it from the perspective of our soldiers enough. And, you know, this isn't a, don't go out and read those. If you want to read them, fine. Still big fans of Joe Kasabian's Hooligans of Kandahar, but, you know, all the rest of it, it's that self-congratulating, back-patting, like, oh, here we were the boys thrown in and turning into men, and the Peshawar Valley and the Korangal Valley and this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, nobody should have been there. You shouldn't have been shot at. They shouldn't have been shot at. Your friends shouldn't be dead. I'm just tired of reading the books and just being like, none of this had to happen. And to listen to Americans talk about it with, as if it means that we have some sort of grace, or that we have some sort of heroics mounted to these experiences, is laughable at best. Like, maybe in the moment you were heroic, but like, you shouldn't have been there. There shouldn't have been a need for you to kill anybody or anybody to kill you. And I think that's really what the Afghan war comes down to, is just like, I'm so angry that so many of us got hurt for no reason, and so many of them got hurt for no reason. And there's assholes on every side, I know, and I'm not sitting here to defend the fucking Taliban or anything like that, but I don't think we did any better, is just where I'm gonna fucking leave that one.
No, and I don't think that the idea that we liberated Afghanistan is true. I mean, it absolutely is not. We installed autocrats and kleptocrats, and they committed violence against civilians. I mean, it might make you feel good as someone reading a column about it in fucking New York, but if you're an Afghan civilian and you live there, you know, if the people beating the shit out of you for some perceived slight are the Taliban or the Afghan National Police under Karzai or under Ghani or under, you know, anybody in the current government, well, it's not really any different, is it? And ultimately, you know, I don't care about the optics. I don't care about the overall narratives. You know, the people who are experiencing this on the ground, their lives matter and their experiences matter. And if you cannot, you cannot justify anything except for the way that it made you feel and completely ignoring the actual ramifications, then you're just kind of entertaining yourself, and you're not actually talking about the real event. And that's all I really got, man. I mean, it's sad, but I knew this moment would come one way or the other. And I hoped that there would be a peace settlement and the Taliban would just become like a conservative political party in Afghanistan and that like the fighting would stop. But that's apparently not what's going to happen. And I dread it, but I also am not surprised. I think that when you get down to it, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I wish there was something more optimistic I could say on the matter.
All right. So Nate, let's make a pact here. Unless there's something really big continuing with Afghanistan, I really don't feel like we need to keep beating the dead horse because we're just going to keep saying the same things over and over again. And I don't know, talking about Afghanistan just makes me depressed.
That's a fair point, man. Like I said, I if there are individual pieces, especially pieces, covering
this is an interesting article, and I highly recommend everybody read it just because it is we didn't really go into it, but about war memorials and bringing stuff home. But it is a very it's a good article about, just the detritus that we leave behind. And JP has written and done photos about all kinds of stuff that has been left behind in Afghanistan, whether it be just junk that was left behind on Bagram, or having to cover things like that, murals and paintings and stuff like that. So it's an interesting article, but I guess it's hard for it's got to be hard for anybody, any Afghan war vet at this point, to talk about Afghanistan, because because left or right, man, nobody's going to be happy. No war veteran of a 20-year war that ends up petering out with nothing to show for it is going to come out of that just being like, yeah, I mean, it was great. We had a lot of fun. We did a lot of work. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, man. I couldn't tell you, but anyway, you know what? You did actually a really cool bonus, so I wanted to let you introduce that.
Yeah, I spoke with Erica Eason about a article that she did about blackness and the bomb. I've done a lot of research into some nuclear stuff just for our show. We did a bonus episode on insane American Cold War weapons, and then we did the same thing for Joe's show, Lions Like Big Donkeys, about insane Cold War Soviet weapons, just kind of a little crossover stuff. But because I was reading that, I was also reading a lot of stuff about other nuclear anthropological stuff, and how in the 50s and 60s, when they were talking about duck and cover and what do we do if cities are bombed, when you had to start coming up with these civil defense ideas, how pretty much it was only white people that were considered. Black, Hispanic, Asian, everybody else was just kind of shoulder shrugged, and we're not going to do it. So Eric and I go into a lot of really interesting details, a lot of scary communism of the time as well, about how building communal shelters is communism now, apparently. So if you're wondering why we're all insane now about communism, we've always been insane about communism. Where to a point where nobody really knows what communism is. We just keep saying that it's bad. So here's a piece from them.
Movie Duck and Cover, which is sort of this, for people who haven't seen it, it's part cartoon, part live action kind of propaganda film teaching children how to respond to a nuclear blast, by, as it suggests, ducking and covering, is kind of exceptional in the fact that it even shows people of color. There are a couple of Black children in the background of this film, but even they're shown following the lead of white students, and all of the sort of named characters in the little skits are white and seemingly quite affluent. So you're absolutely right that there is a void where much of America should be when it comes to imagining or picturing how civil defense might look. And I think that it's no surprise that if you look at the writings of civil defense organizers, what you find is that in majority Black areas, there was a low rate of participation. White bureaucrats involved in civil defense often noted this with frustration and, decried the apathy. But I think it speaks to realization about the ways in which, whiteness and the nuclear program were intimately tied. And I would say not only was there, a lack of participation in terms of purchasing, let's say, sets to build bomb shelters or what have you, which, that realistically, participation in that was not so high across the board in American society. But in 1953, when, in 1951, when the FCDA is about to be headed up by a noted segregationist, there are concerted efforts by the NAACP not only to protest this appointment of a segregationist and a white supremacist to be head of this organization, but to boycott all kinds of civil defense measures. And it should be noted that this at the time was illegal, right? In New York State, for instance, if you refuse to take part in mock exercises of evacuation or taking cover, you could face a year in prison or a $500 fine. And so this was, a real principled stance, right? Contrary to what these white bureaucrats were decrying, it wasn't apathy per se. It was a realization that this was not in their best interests to participate in, because a segregationist heading the organization responsible for civil defense would create and indeed allowed for the creation of, when he was later appointed, segregated bomb shelters, segregated civil defense corps, and a willingness to put their lives on the line, to put their finances on the line, their careers on the line, to oppose this.
Mm-hmm. It is very interesting also to me that when there's discussions about civil defense and bomb shelters, that the federal government pretty much just put the onus on the people. It's like, well, you need to build your own bomb shelter. Either figure it out in your backyard or in your basement or something. But if there's going to be a bomb shelter, you're going to have to do it, because they did talk about, as you mentioned, having large fallout shelters, having large areas for lots of people to go into, and then the concern of, well, what happens when we have black people intermingling with white people in these bomb shelters, which is a very it there's a lot of things that, like, as I read your piece and as I go back and rewatch some of these things that you've seen bits and pieces of, you can really see that there's just not a lot of consideration for the people of America. And I don't know if that's, if the propaganda films are specifically meant to do that, because it seems like a lot of it's like, yeah, duck and cover, get under a picnic blanket, or just get into a defilade of some kind, get behind some cover and you'll be fine. But no, that bomb exploded, a mile and a half away, and you have about 12 seconds until you're going to be vaporized. Like, none of these things are going to matter. And it really, like, it's not only the excluding anybody who is white from from civil defense ideas and the things that are going to be done to quote save people during a nuclear strike in a city, but also just like a complete removal of any kind of responsibility for it. It feels like, because they know that, like, yeah, we dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killed hundreds of thousands of people in a flash, and just in a second. What is that going to do to an urban center? Like, there's even, well, we've got evacuations, we got this, like, it's a bomb, it's just going to explode and kill everybody. There's nothing, you've created something that it just does death, and you don't give a shit. It's just, it really has that feel to it. It's either we don't care, or we're telling you this so that you remain calm, because if we told you exactly how horrifying nuclear bombs were, you would all be scared out of your minds the entire time.
Yeah, absolutely. Watching films like Duck and Cover, which, if your audience hasn't seen it, I recommend watching it. It's very eerie and it's not very long. But, you get the sense of the sort of limits of these people's imagination, or maybe their desired limit. It's not clear to me. But the children who are, undertaking these duck and cover exercises in this movie, they're completely calm, right? At no point do they panic. At no point do they hesitate. They see a bright light in the distance and they immediately duck, right? Whereas I think if you saw a bright light in the distance, you'd probably be spending those 12 seconds scratching your head and wondering what it was. Or if you had an intuition, panicking, right? So there's this, it's almost entering like an alternative reality of people as kind of automatons enacting, the perfect scenario. And it's not really countenancing the emotional realities or, the realities that, communication is not always clear. People don't always understand what they're seeing, et cetera, et cetera. So it is, really odd. Regarding the abandonment of the collective shelters program, I think part of that speaks to just how deep anti-communist sentiment in the U.S. was at this time, right? I mean, of course, this is the Cold War, and there was this idea that building collective shelters and sheltering together was somehow communistic and therefore evil, as well as that, that kind of, huge public expenditure would, of course, be, that's socialism. That's terrible, right? And then even in terms of the evacuation planning, um, you know, for people in cities, they have these ideas that, okay, we can't make them duck and cover because they don't have the space to build a shelter. So, they can just leave the city and they can be billeted in, rural communities. Well, there's an idea there that rural communities are somehow inherently anti-communists, and they are the guardians of a democratic spirit, an American spirit. I don't think it's a coincidence in this regard that the rural communities that the organizers are imagining are white Christian communities, rather than, for example, communities of immigrant agricultural workers in the Central Valley in California, for example. So there's this idea that the benevolent influence of these anti-communist, pure rural folks will help to preserve democracy. And this is sort of counterbalanced against the vision of urbanites as unclean physically and morally, right? As sinful, as living in slums that lead to easy conflagrations. Another theme in these movies that you're talking about is kind of blaming homemakers, especially women.
Everybody, as always, you can follow me at Army Strang, follow Nate at In These Deserts, and follow the podcast at Hell of a Way. We have lots of great shows coming out, more bonus stuff coming out, and we have plenty of bonus stuff in our backlog if you're just now joining on to our Patreon. So whatever way you support us, we appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yep, take care.